What happens when a former royal sits down with The View's most seasoned hosts and everything goes catastrophically wrong? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle faces off against Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg in what starts as a routine interview but quickly spirals into television chaos. This isn't just another celebrity appearance gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how quickly things can explode when half-truths meet hard questions. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when America's most controversial duchess tries to control the narrative on live television. The atmosphere in the View studio felt different from the moment Meghan Markle stepped onto the set. The usual pre-show chatter between the hosts had an edge to it, and even the production crew seemed to sense that something was brewing. Whoopi Goldberg, seated in her familiar spot at the head of the table, had that particular look in her eyes, the one that regular viewers know means she's not in the mood for nonsense. Joy Behar was unusually quiet during the commercial break, her notes spread out in front of her like battle plans. Sarah Haynes kept glancing nervously between her co-hosts, while Alyssa Farah Griffin and Sunny Hostin whispered in hushed tones about the questions they'd prepared. The tension was palpable, and it only intensified when Meghan walked out, flashing her practiced smile and waving to the audience with the kind of calculated grace that screamed media training. "Welcome back to The View," Whoopi began, her voice carrying that familiar authority that has made her a daytime television icon. "We're here with Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, author, podcaster, and entrepreneur. Meghan, thank you for joining us." Meghan settled into her chair, her posture perfect, her smile unwavering. "Thank you so much for having me, Whoopi. It's always such a pleasure to be here with you ladies." The pleasantries felt forced, like everyone was going through the motions while waiting for the real conversation to begin. Joy leaned forward slightly, her pen tapping against her notepad in a rhythm that suggested she was already itching to get to the meat of the interview. "So Meghan," Joy started, her voice deceptively casual, "you've been making headlines again with your latest business ventures. But I have to ask, there's been some controversy about your charity work and where exactly the money goes. Can you clear that up for our viewers?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and for just a moment, Meghan's smile faltered. It was barely perceptible, but Whoopi caught it, and so did the cameras. The audience, which had been enthusiastically applauding just moments before, fell silent. "Well, Joy," Meghan began, her voice taking on that particular tone she uses when she feels cornered, "I think there's been a lot of misinformation spread about our charitable work. Harry and I have always been completely transparent about our foundation and where our donations go." Sunny Hostin, ever the prosecutor, wasn't buying it. "But Meghan, the financial reports show some pretty significant discrepancies. Your foundation took in millions last year, but very little of that actually made it to the causes you claim to support. How do you explain that?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Meghan's media training kicked in full force, her hands gesturing in that practiced way as she launched into what sounded like a prepared statement. "I think what's happening here is that people are looking for reasons to tear down the work we're doing. We're helping communities, we're supporting causes that matter, and yes, running a foundation requires administrative costs." "Administrative costs?" Joy's voice sharpened, and there was that familiar edge that longtime viewers know means she's about to pounce. "Meghan, we're talking about administrative costs that eat up nearly 70% of your donations. That's not administrative, that's excessive." The audience began to murmur, sensing the shift in energy. Meghan's composure was starting to crack, her smile becoming more strained with each passing second. She looked around the table, perhaps hoping to find a friendlier face, but even Sarah Haynes was looking at her with barely concealed skepticism. "I think you're misunderstanding the numbers," Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. "And frankly, I'm surprised that you would attack charitable work without having all the facts." Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. "Nobody's attacking anything, Meghan. We're asking questions. That's what we do here. And when someone comes on our show and talks about their charity work, we have a responsibility to our viewers to ask the hard questions." "But you're not asking questions," Meghan shot back, her carefully constructed facade beginning to slip. "You're making accusations based on incomplete information. And I have to say, this feels very much like the same kind of treatment I received from the British media." The comparison to the British media was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Joy's eyes widened, and she leaned forward in her chair. Oh, so now we're the British media? Because we're asking you to explain where charity money goes? That's rich, Meghan. Alyssa Farah Griffin, trying to maintain some semblance of balance, attempted to steer the conversation. Meghan, I think what my colleagues are trying to get at is that transparency is important when you're asking people to donate to causes. Can you just walk us through the breakdown of where the money goes? But Meghan was no longer interested in diplomatic responses. The mask was slipping, and underneath was something much less polished, much more defensive. I don't think I should have to justify every dollar we spend to a panel of people who clearly came into this interview with an agenda. The studio fell silent except for the hum of the cameras. Even the audience seemed to be holding its breath. Whoopi's expression had shifted from professional skepticism to something approaching disbelief. An agenda? Whoopi's voice was dangerously quiet. Meghan, our agenda is the truth. Our agenda is asking the questions that our viewers want answered. And right now, you're not answering them. I'm not answering them because they're not fair questions, Meghan replied, her voice growing more heated. You're treating me like I'm some kind of criminal instead of someone who's trying to make a difference in the world. Joy couldn't contain herself any longer. Making a difference? Meghan, you're taking money from people who think they're helping causes, and you're using most of it to fund your lifestyle. That's not making a difference. That's exploitation. The accusation hit like a thunderbolt. Meghan's face flushed, and for a moment, it looked like she might storm off right then and there. But instead, she did something even more damaging. She doubled down. That is absolutely not true, she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. And I resent the implication that Harry and I are somehow profiting inappropriately from our charitable work. We've sacrificed everything to help people, and this is the thanks we get. Sonny Hostin, sensing blood in the water, pressed forward. Sacrificed everything? Meghan, you live in a $16 million mansion in Montecito. You have Netflix deals, Spotify deals, book deals. What exactly have you sacrificed? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Meghan's response would determine whether this interview could be salvaged or whether it would become the kind of television moment that gets replayed for years to come. But as she opened her mouth to respond, it became clear that salvage was no longer an option. Sacrificed. Meghan's voice cracked with indignation, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as she gestured. We sacrificed our titles, our security, our family relationships, our entire lives in England. We gave up everything to escape the toxic environment that was literally killing me. The studio audience gasped collectively. This wasn't the composed, media-trained Meghan they'd seen in countless interviews. This was someone pushed to her breaking point, and the cameras captured every moment of her unraveling. Joy Behar's eyes widened with a mixture of shock and journalistic hunger. Killing you? Meghan, that's a very serious accusation. But let's stick to the facts here. You're claiming poverty while living in luxury, and you're asking people to donate to causes that seem to primarily benefit your own organization. I never claimed poverty. Meghan shot back, her voice rising to a pitch that made the audio technicians wince. But we have expenses. Do you know what it costs to maintain security? Do you know what it costs to run a global foundation? Of course you don't, because you've never had to deal with the level of scrutiny and threats that we face every single day. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to barely concealed irritation. Meghan, honey, let me tell you something about scrutiny. I've been in this business for decades. I've been black in Hollywood when that meant something very different than it does today. Don't lecture us about dealing with pressure. The comparison seemed to strike Meghan like a physical blow. Her face flushed deeper, and she looked around the table as if searching for an ally. Finding none, she doubled down with the kind of desperation that makes for compelling television. That's completely different, she insisted, her voice wavering between anger and what sounded suspiciously like tears. You chose this life. You weren't born into a system designed to destroy you. You weren't married into a family that saw you as a threat from day one. Sarah Haynes, who had been relatively quiet up to this point, finally spoke up. But Meghan, you did choose this life too. You chose to marry into the royal family. You chose to take on those responsibilities. And now you're choosing to run a foundation that, frankly, has some serious transparency issues. Transparency issues? Meghan's voice was becoming increasingly shrill. The only transparency issue here is that you refuse to see the good work we're doing because you're too busy trying to tear us down. This is exactly what happened in England, and now it's happening here. Alyssa Farah Griffin attempted to interject with some semblance of diplomatic balance. Meghan, I don't think anyone is trying to tear you down. We're just asking for clarity on some financial matters that have been raised by investigative reporters. Investigative reporters who are being fed information by people who want to see us fail. Meghan exploded, her composure completely shattered now. You're all part of the same machine that tried to silence me before, and I won't let it happen again. The accusation hit the table like a bomb. Joy Behar's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, offense, and finally, a cold anger that longtime viewers knew meant someone was about to get verbally eviscerated. Part of what machine? Joy's voice was dangerously quiet. Meghan, we're journalists. We ask questions. That's literally our job. And right now, you're sounding paranoid and evasive, which frankly makes us want to ask even more questions. Sonny Hostin, never one to back down from a fight, leaned forward with the intensity of a prosecutor closing in on a guilty verdict. Let me ask you this directly, Meghan. Can you tell our viewers, right now, what percentage of the donations to your foundation actually make it to the causes you claim to support? The question was simple, direct, and devastating in its clarity. For a moment, Meghan seemed to freeze, her mouth opening and closing without producing sound. The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras whirring. You're trying to trap me, she finally stammered. These are complex financial matters that can't be reduced to simple percentages. Actually, they can, Whoopi interjected, her patience clearly exhausted. Every legitimate charity publishes these numbers. It's standard practice. The fact that you can't give us a straight answer is telling us everything we need to know. Meghan's face went through a rapid series of emotions: panic, anger, desperation, and finally, something that looked like calculation. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on a new quality, one that sounded both defensive and accusatory. You know what? I see what's happening here. This is a setup. You invited me on this show not to have a conversation, but to ambush me with gotcha questions designed to make me look bad. This is exactly the kind of behavior that drove us out of England, and I'm not going to sit here and take it. The accusation sent shockwaves through the panel. Whoopi's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline, while Joy looked like she'd been slapped. Even the usually diplomatic Sarah Haynes looked offended. A setup? Whoopi's voice carried the kind of authority that had made her a force in entertainment for decades. Meghan, we do our homework before every interview. That's called being prepared, not setting up an ambush. The fact that you see legitimate questions as an attack says more about your situation than it does about our journalistic integrity. But Meghan was past the point of rational discourse. The combination of mounting pressure, uncomfortable questions, and what she perceived as hostile treatment had pushed her into full defensive mode. Your journalistic integrity? You're sitting here parroting the same lies and conspiracy theories that the tabloids have been spreading about us for years. What lies? Joy demanded, her voice sharp with professional indignation. We're asking you about your own financial documents. These aren't tabloid stories, Meghan. These are public records. Public records that have been manipulated and taken out of context by people who have an agenda. Meghan shot back, her voice cracking with emotion. You're all part of the same system that tried to destroy me before, and I can see that nothing has changed. The conversation had spiraled completely out of control. What had started as a standard celebrity interview had devolved into something resembling a courtroom cross-examination, with Meghan increasingly taking on the role of a hostile witness. Sonny Hostin, sensing that this might be the moment for a knockout punch, leaned forward with laser-like focus. Meghan, let me ask you one more time. You're asking people to donate money to causes. You're using your celebrity and your royal connections to solicit these donations. Don't you think those people deserve to know exactly where their money is going? It was a fair question, asked in a reasonable tone, but to Meghan it clearly felt like the final straw. Her face went through a series of expressions: desperation, anger, and finally, something that looked like pure fury. I don't have to justify anything to you people. she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. You've made it clear that you're not interested in the truth. You're interested in creating drama and destroying reputations, just like every other media outlet we've dealt with. The studio fell into stunned silence. Even the audience seemed to sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary, the complete meltdown of a carefully constructed public persona. But Meghan wasn't finished. Standing abruptly from her chair, she began pacing behind the table like a caged animal, her hands gesticulating wildly as her voice rose to a pitch that bordered on hysteria. You want to know the truth? The truth is that we've been targeted from day one by people who couldn't stand the idea of a biracial American woman joining the royal family and actually making a difference. The camera operators scrambled to follow her movement, while the hosts sat frozen in their chairs, clearly unsure how to handle what was rapidly becoming television chaos. Whoopi was the first to recover, her voice cutting through Meghan's tirade with practiced authority. Meghan, you need to sit down and lower your voice. This is a television show, not a therapy session. But Meghan whirled around to face her, eyes blazing with fury. Don't you dare tell me what to do. You have no idea what it's like to have every single thing you do scrutinized, criticized, and twisted into something sinister. Every dollar we spend, every breath we take, every word we say gets dissected by people who have already decided we're guilty of something. Joy Behar, who had been watching the meltdown with a mixture of fascination and horror, finally found her voice. Meghan, nobody has decided anything. We're asking you simple questions about your charity's finances, and instead of answering them, you're having a breakdown on live television. The word breakdown seemed to hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her face contorted with rage, and she slammed her hand down on the table with such force that the water glasses jumped. A breakdown? A breakdown? I'm defending myself against a coordinated attack by a media establishment that has been trying to silence me for years. Sarah Haynes, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things were taking, attempted to de-escalate. Meghan, please, let's just take a breath here. Nobody is attacking you. We're having a conversation about, no. Meghan cut her off, her voice reaching a crescendo that made the studio technicians wince. This isn't a conversation. This is an inquisition. You invited me here under false pretenses, and now you're trying to destroy my reputation on live television. Sunny Hostin, ever the prosecutor, wasn't about to let the accusations slide. False pretenses? Meghan, we told your publicist exactly what topics we planned to discuss. We sent the questions in advance. If you weren't prepared to answer them, you shouldn't have agreed to appear. The revelation that the questions had been provided in advance seemed to deflate some of Meghan's righteous indignation, but only for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on a different quality, desperate, almost pleading. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Harry and I, we're trying to build something meaningful, something that can actually help people. But everywhere we turn, there are people like you trying to tear us down, questioning our motives, making us out to be frauds and criminals. Whoopi leaned forward, her expression softer but still stern. Meghan, nobody called you a criminal. But when you run a charity, transparency isn't optional. It's a legal requirement. And your evasiveness about these financial questions is only making things worse. Evasiveness. Meghan's voice cracked, and for a moment it looked like she might actually break down in tears. I'm not being evasive. I'm trying to explain that the situation is complicated, but none of you want to listen to explanations. You just want sound bites that make us look bad. Alyssa Farah-Griffin made one last attempt at diplomacy. Meghan, if you could just give us one clear answer about where the money goes, I think we could move past this and talk about the positive work you're trying to do. It was perhaps the most reasonable request that had been made during the entire interview, but to Meghan it seemed to represent everything she was fighting against. Her response was swift and devastating. Clear answer? You want a clear answer? Here's your clear answer. I don't owe you people anything. I don't owe you explanations. I don't owe you transparency. And I certainly don't owe you the satisfaction of watching me grovel for your approval. The studio erupted. The audience gasped. Audibly, some members actually standing up to get a better view of the unfolding drama. The production staff could be seen scrambling in the background, clearly unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the train wreck continue. Joy Behar's mouth fell open in disbelief. Did you just say you don't owe transparency to people who donate to your charity? Did those words actually come out of your mouth? Realizing what she had just said, Meghan tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The damage was done, and her attempts to clarify only made things worse. That's not what I meant. You're twisting my words, just like everyone else does. But Whoopi had heard enough, rising from her chair with the kind of authority that comes from decades of controlling television chaos. She pointed directly at Meghan. No, that's exactly what you meant. And you know what? If that's how you feel about accountability, then maybe you shouldn't be running a charity at all. The words hit like a thunderclap. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, rage, and finally, something that looked like pure hatred. When she spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. How dare you? How dare you question my right to help people? You know nothing about what Harry and I have been through. Nothing about the sacrifices we've made. Nothing about the good we're trying to do in this world. We know you can't answer basic questions about your charity's finances, Sonny interjected coldly. And, frankly, that tells us everything we need to know about the good you're supposedly doing. That was the final straw. Meghan's carefully constructed facade didn't just crack, it shattered completely. Grabbing her purse from the floor, she stood up and began backing away from the table, her voice rising to a shriek that could probably be heard in the lobby. You people are despicable. You're bullies and liars, and I won't sit here for one more second and listen to your garbage. This interview is over. Joy Behar, ever the New Yorker, wasn't about to let her have the last word. Running away, Meghan? That seems to be your specialty. The parting shot hit its mark. Meghan spun around, her face twisted with fury, and for a moment it looked like she might actually charge back toward the table. Instead, she raised her voice to a level that made the audio technicians scramble for their controls. I'm not running away. I'm refusing to participate in this witch hunt. And with that, she turned on her heel and stormed toward the exit, her high heels clicking against the studio floor like gunshots. The camera followed her retreat, capturing every moment of her dramatic exit as she pushed past startled production assistants and disappeared through the studio doors. The host sat in stunned silence for several long seconds, the weight of what had just happened settling over them like dust after an explosion. Finally, Whoopi turned to face the camera, her expression a mixture of professional composure and barely concealed amazement. Well, she said, her voice carrying just a hint of satisfaction, I guess that answers our questions about transparency. Joy shook her head in disbelief. In 30 years of doing television, I have never seen anything like that. Absolutely unbelievable. As the show cut to commercial, the audience sat in shocked silence, still processing what they had just witnessed. It was the kind of television moment that would be dissected and analyzed for months to come. The complete and utter destruction of a carefully crafted public image, broadcast live for millions to see. The interview that was supposed to rehabilitate Meghan's reputation had instead become a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral out of control when preparation meets desperation and truth collides with carefully constructed narratives. It was television gold, the kind of moment that reminds viewers why live TV can be both terrifying and absolutely compelling. The View had gotten exactly what it was looking for, answers. Just not the ones anyone expected.